right. Hello, and welcome to another episode of Floorcast, or actually not Floorcast, of Less is More Education. This is episode 18 with your host, Steve Flores. And how's everyone doing this week? Sorry I wasn't here last week. I've been dealing with a lot of health issues and other things lately. But I'm glad to be back today. What we're going to do in episode 18 is review a book called Free to Learn by Dr. Peter Gray. And this is an interesting book. I'm going to kind of start off by talking about why it reminds me of popcorn. But before we do that, if you enjoy I really hope you enjoy the podcast. And if you do, it would be great if you could subscribe, give us a 5-star rating. You can also join us in our journey by participating with us. You can email me at lessismore.education@skiff.com. That's skiff.com. You can also find me on Instagram at lessismore.education or on Twitter, lessismoreeduc1. You can visit us at our website at lessismore.education or find us on YouTube, which is going to be linked below. If you'd like to contribute to a greater extent on Patreon, that would be awesome. You can find us at patreon.com/lessismoreeducation. And I want to give a special shout out to the other podcast that I do with my co-host Jason Pasigan, which is called The Generational Divide. And there you can find wherever you listen to your podcasts as well. All right, so let's get into the book review for today. So the book that I'm reviewing today is called Free to Learn by Dr. Peter Gray. Free to Learn kind of reminds me of like popcorn. You know, like popcorn is one of these interesting things that when you smell it, you really, really want it, right? I think everybody can agree with that. You go to a movie theater, you smell popcorn, it makes you really, really want to have it. And then you go, you wait in line, you buy the popcorn, and it's only 50 cents more to get the big bag. And then there you have your big bag of popcorn. And you start eating your popcorn. The first few bites are really gratifying. And then somewhere around halfway through the bag, you start to realize, oh, I'm just eating this out of habit. I actually don't want any more, it's just comfortable putting this in my mouth. The book Free to Learn is kind of like that in that I felt like there was a lot of intrigue at the beginning of the book, and it got really, really interesting, or at least the first part. And then as the book went on, I was starting to think about it, and I was like, yeah, there's certain things in here that are really good that we can take out and put them in the context of modern education. But overall, I just felt like I had to get through the rest of the book. But it was a really interesting book, and I found that there were some key ideas to get out of there. So if you read through the book, it kind of basically just argues that children can learn an amazing amount of information through just play. And the book starts off with this really interesting history of education of how do we get to the point that we're at now with modern education? And it kind of tracks the development, and we used Prussia as a basis of our education system today. And it kind of was around the time and after the Industrial Revolution, and there was a system that was kind of put in place to make really good workers, especially line workers. And that's, if you think about a traditional classroom, that's what it is, right? You have everybody set up in nice traditional rows. The kids go sit there. They're to concentrate and focus on work and doing repeated work until they get through the entire day. And it's meant to just basically, it's also very hierarchical, right? You have students and then you have teachers, and so it makes makes students more adept to dealing with authority, I guess. And it's not a great system. It's not a very good system at all. But it takes you through the history in really good detail, and I think the book is really good if you just want to have like a good understanding as to like how did we get to where we're at today. And then the next part of the book kind of goes into, well, let's contrast this, what we have in our modern education system, to hunter-gatherer societies. And hunter-gatherer societies are really important and relevant because that's how humans have existed for most of our time here on Earth. Most of the time, we've been in hunter-gatherer societies. So understanding how information is transmitted in those societies could be valuable. And I agree with that point for sure. It could really give us some insights as to how we can leverage our own biology in order for us to learn more, or maybe even learn more technical information. And there are a couple of points in there that I want to get to, especially about like specific details to how certain moods can translate into very effective learning. But the if we want to understand hunter-gatherer societies, like think about like I remember reading, hearing about this in a podcast. I can't remember where, but they basically said like if you look at all of human history and imagine that every like 100 years is a page in a book, right? And this book tracks all of human history from our initial evolution to right now. Most of that book, like 99% of that book, 99.9% of that book, is just going to be the same thing written on it over and over and over and over again, right? Like most of human history has stayed the same. It's not until like maybe this past like 3,000 to 5,000 years that things have really, really drastically changed. And that's when we started to get more and more agricultural, and we started to group into bigger and bigger cities, and you start to see like metropolitans sprout up, and you get to see like different systems of government pop up. You know, you have like empires and democratic states, and this huge technological revolution just kind of like spiked up, And if you're looking at our book, it's only like the past like page and a half that has been really, really, really interesting, right? Because that's where most of our technological development is. And that's one of the things that I wish more people understood is the time that we're living in is really weird for us. It's really odd that we live in these large cities. Like that was never true. It was never like the case for most of human history that we lived with, 20 million neighbors. Like that is beyond anyone's comprehension. And it could be that a lot of our psychological issues, like our instances of depression and anxiety, probably stem from just being around that many people. Most of the time, there's this guy named Dunbar. I think his name was Robert Dunbar, but he came up with this idea of the Dunbar number. And Dunbar's number is just like the average amount of people that you can kind of keep track in your head, meaning you know who they are, who they're related to, like certain aspects of them, like they're like either friends or family. And for the average person, that number is around 150 people. And that's the average size of communities for most of human history, right? Most of us only lived in groups of like maybe 150, maybe 200 people at most, all in one spot living together. And that, contrast that to like now, it like just up and down your street, you're going to get more than that. In some buildings, you might get more than that many people living in just the building, right? And so you're coming across way more people than your biology kind of knows what to do with. Now, there's some people that argue that we can kind of transcend our biology, and I call these people the transcendents. They think like, oh, well, because we are so adaptable, and we are adaptable. There's lots of evidence to show that we're very adaptable. If you look at humans exist in all parts of the world, right? In all climates. We exist in the Arctic. We exist above the Arctic Circle. We exist below the Arctic Circle. We exist in tropical climates. We exist in deserts. We exist like pretty much everywhere. So we are highly adaptable. But I think that the problem with the transcendence, which I'll get into later, is like they seem to think that adaptability is, or that ability to adapt is much greater than what it actually is, or at least they tend to believe that. But with hunter gatherers, just getting back to my point, one of the most important things that we should understand when it comes to education is, well, how did hunter gatherers transmit information, and then what kind of information are they able to transfer across generations? And if we understand that, then that can give us clues as to like the best ways that we can use to learn as modern day humans. And that seems to be like the basic thesis of the entire book, Free to Learn. And it's basically saying that if we just leverage all of these ways that humans have learned in the past, then we can make more efficient learners. And there's a lot of truth to that. I really do think that there's a lot of truth to that. And so, well, how did hunter-gatherers operate in the world? Well, there was no classrooms in those societies. And how do we know that? Well, the book looks at 10 different tribes, and then it looks at how information is transferred across all 10 different tribes over the course of time. And so there's a lot of commonalities. Like one of the commonalities is there's no formal education for any of these tribes. So these tribes that they're looking at, they're global, right? So some of them are in the Amazon, some of them are in Malaysia, some of them are in Africa, some of them are. So these are all hunter-gatherer tribes that still exist today. And so this is what we call like an ethnographic study, right? So you try to look at a bunch of separate groups that exist in a similar like kind of environment, and you try to see like, all right, what's the commonality of all these? So none of these modern hunter-gatherer tribes have formalized education or classrooms, right? Like they barely have homes, like much less like a building dedicated to education. That's not really a big a thing in hunter-gatherer tribes. So what do kids do in these tribes? When most of these tribes, from the time the kids are like around 4 and can leave mom to, whenever they go through their rites of passage to become adults, right? So for some tribes, it's like around 14, 15. For some tribes, it's a little bit later. The kids just play all day. Like, that's it. They just play. Like, from the moment they wake up, to the moment they fall asleep, they're out there playing. And so what are they doing when they are playing? There's been a lot of research on play and on playfulness and a lot of books and a lot of like our foundations in modern education. Like, so if you look at Jean Piaget's work or Lev Vygotsky's work, or even, you can even draw some similarities with animal work, especially with rats that have been done with play. What you'll see is that play has like these certain characteristics, right? The goal of play is to keep it going. And if you remember back from when you were a kid, if you grew up the way I did, I grew up like very luckily, like because I had a neighborhood, and in this neighborhood, it was like a circular neighborhood, and it only had one entrance in or out of the neighborhood. And so a lot of the parents felt comfortable just like, when their kids got home, like you guys could just go out, right? And or maybe do your homework and then leave and go play with your neighborhood friends. And that's what we would spend most of our time after school doing, which was great. And and a lot of us honestly were just latchkey kids, where we just get told to go home after school, and then we would get home and then we wouldn't have anything to do. So, we'd have to figure out things to do. So we would go play. And in a neighborhood like that, all the kids are of different ages. We ranged from like 3, 4 years old to about like 13, 14 years old. And we all played together. There was no like this distinction of age. And this is one of the things that is true about all these hunter-gatherer tribes is they don't draw lines and separate people by age like we do here. There's even like certain countries that have very good educational systems like Finland that do the same thing. They got rid of grades like first grade, second grade, third grade, fourth grade, fifth grade. They got rid of that in the 80s because they knew that that doesn't make sense, right? Like like in terms of learning, that doesn't make sense. Why should we separate people by age? Like it's their personal development that's more important than your age. And you know this from your own personal experience. How many times have you come across somebody that's of a certain age and you go like, wow, this guy acts like he's 20, but he's 40, right? like so your actual time that you've been on earth has nothing to do with your maturity, and it has nothing to do with your academic age, I guess, right? In any given particular subject, even like a certain kid, like I remember when I was a kid, I got put into the GATE program, but I got put into the Great GATE program for reading and writing, but not for math. Like my math skills were on par with everyone else's, but my reading and writing skills were a few grades above where I was at, compared relative to all the other kids around me. So I would get pulled out during those lessons. I'd go to an upper grade and I'd do the work that was required of me over there. And so, like a student might be advanced in reading, they might be advanced in writing, or they might be, behind in other topics. So why should we like separate all the kids out by age if we know that individuals vary this much? Doesn't really make sense. So that's a lesson that we could probably adapt or add into our modern education system. And we'll talk about the details of that later. But this is one of the things. If you look at modern hunter-gatherer tribes, the kids are just out playing, and more likely than not, they're out playing in mixed age groups. And in fact, a lot of kids prefer work or playing with older kids if they're younger, and older kids, like to play with kids of their own age, but they feel like an obligation to play with the younger kids, and and that has a lot to do with, I think, biology. Kids are cute, man. Like if you have kids, you'll understand this. You'll grasp this idea like immediately. Like there's when a kid looks at you with like pleading eyes and goes, "Do you want to play with me?" Like there's this urge, like as an adult or even as an older kid, thinking back at the times when I was in my neighborhood, that I would just like go like, "Yes, I have to say yes to this." Like there's not even like a choice. Like there's something in me that goes like, "Yes, young kid, let me take you by the hand. Let me show you something cool." Right? And so in hunter-gatherer tribes, that happens a lot. Particularly if the age difference is between like 2 and 4 years old, or 2 and 4 years age difference. They'll like, you'll have like this pulling of the older kids, of the younger kids in terms of like the kinds of play and things that they'll do. So when kids are young, they want to play, they want to keep the play going. So the other thing is kids are around adults as well at all times, right? And so the book kind of goes into like these stories of like, well, how do kids learn like what the adults do? Well, they learn by watching, So it tells like a story of an adult that's working on making this one tool, and this kid comes in and like looks at them and like is trying to figure out like, oh, what are they doing? Like, how are they doing that? Why are they doing that? And they start to like play with the tools and even like disrupt the actual work that was going on. But the adult would just kind of keep going about its business and would only answer questions or only talk to the kid if the kid asked a direct question. Like, oh, why are you doing it that way? Then the adult would answer. But if, there's no question being asked, there's no reason in talking, right? And this has a lot to do with like this experiential aspect to learning. So the best kind of learning that you can do is really like trial and error, right? Or experimentation, where you actually like go and you try something and then you see if that works out. And this is one of the things that I try to do a lot of in my class was I would show the kids like an experiment. We'll just start off a lesson with an experiment, right? Go like, all right, here's like a bunch of chemicals. Let's see what happens when we mix them together, right? Here's a system for mixing them. Go do that, and then let's just see if we can figure out any cool patterns or anything interesting there. And then from the patterns and the things that they do and the things that they try, that gets their curiosity going, and then that gets them like to ask questions, and then that's where like the learning starts to happen. And that's really like leveraging this like ability to play or this curiosity in order to make education better. So another thing that the kids do when you are in a hunter-gatherer tribe is uh, you try to like negotiate games. So a lot of the play is through games. So there's a couple of different kinds of play. There's games, and then there's like play acting, where you try to like play a role of something. You know, it's kind of like when you're playing house. You know, like, oh, I'll be the mommy, you be the daddy. You know, like that kind of role or role playing. But the other type is like just games. So if I remember back to when I was a kid, we one of the things that we would love to play is tag, right? But we're all different sizes and ages. So we had to it would be pretty it'd be pretty rude if we all played by the exact same rules, right? Because the young kids that can't run as fast as the older kids, they just they just stay tagged, and then they wouldn't be able to reach any of the adults or the bigger kids, not adults, but the bigger kids. And so we have to do like specialized rules through negotiating. So if I'm a young kid and I'm playing tag in a mixed age group, and there's a kid that's clearly bigger than everyone else, then we would say like, all right, like big kid Paul, you can play, but you gotta like tie one hand behind your back, right? Or you can only hop on one leg. And we'll try to come up rules so that the playing field will become level so that we can keep the game going, right? So that we can keep playing. Because again, that's the goal of play. Let's just keep playing. And so there's a lot of negotiation that has to go on, especially when you have mixed age groups, right? Because if one kid becomes a tyrant, nobody's going to want to play with that kid. That kid's going to be excluded. And once that kid gets excluded, that's how they learn, oh, I have to adapt my behavior to the group, right? And that's what keeps us like able to work with one another in these groups. And so all of these like things that hunter-gatherer kids do like kind of are reflected into modern play that I experienced as a kid. You know, I don't know how much of this play is going on anymore. I've read some studies that put it at around 50% of kids play outside every day, right? Like I think only or I think it was like 50%, or maybe it was 30%. I can't remember the exact numbers. I don't have the study pulled out in front of me, but it's not a majority of kids. It's not everyone, and there's a big percentage of kids that like never go out and play freely, right? Where they just like go out. There's no adult supervision. Nobody's out there playing with them, or there's no like adults telling them like, oh, you can't play like that. That's too rough. That's too what. No, that's not what free play is. Free play is hands off, right, by the adults. So the only reason why an adult would get involved is if there was an imminent physical danger, right? So that means that, you know, like a kid's about to get hit by a car or something, an adult rushes in to like save the kid. Like that's literally like anything short of that is not considered free play, right? Because that's not what happened in hunter-gatherer tribes. You know, at least that's like the claim being made by Dr. Peter Gray. And so the kids would play. And so what kinds of things would they learn? Well, one of the things that happens if you study the kids that are playing in these hunter-gatherer tribes is that they mimic adults. And so they'll play games that involve like hunting when they're really young and like hitting things, like target shooting, right? Maybe setting up like basic traps or whatever. And then they would just like kind of play like that. Or they would play mimicking animals so that they can get into like the psychology of animals. And they would observe animals. And they would try to do what they do. And then as the kids got older, like this play turns into like actual like things that they're doing, right? So if a kid grows up and he becomes like a hunter, then he learns how to hunt through play, right? It starts with you know, being able to hit a rock with another rock by throwing, you know, using the throwing arm to making a very basic bow to observing the adults make advanced bows and then making one like that to hunting small game, right? To eventually joining a hunting party to go get big game. And all of that is done in the spirit of play. And the kids can learn a wide variety of information. Some of the older kids like practice tracking animals. And one of the astounding things that I saw in the book was a story of like how these older kids, through playing, were able to determine, all right, if they found a bunch of footprints, right? So like a herd of animals had, crossed by like a sandy area, right? They could look at the tracks. They could be able to tell how many animals were there, right? And they would be able to tell what direction they were moving, what they were doing there, what they had been eating, and they could identify which animal was injured just from looking at tracks. So that's really high detail, highly technical information. And the idea is that because you can get such high detail and high technical information through just play, that we should be able to do that with our modern children. But we got to put them in the correct conditions, right? Conditions where they're in mixed age groups, where they're allowed to play, where they are given the resources to learn the types of things that they want to learn. And they can and that spirit of play, right? That playful mood is what drives them and improves their memory. So there's a bunch of research on, on basic play, right? So, I guess the ultimate conclusion that the book comes up to when you're looking at the research is learning, problem solving, and creativity are worsened by interventions that interfere with playfulness and improved by interventions that promote playfulness, right? And there's work done by Teresa Amabile. I can't ever say this name, Amabile, Amabile, who's a professor at the Harvard Business School, and she looks at like pressure, right? And so what she does is she puts students into two different kinds of scenarios and then sees like how they do on a specific task. So on tasks and then she applies like pressure, and the pressure can be in the form of, I'm going to give you a test, right? That's where pressure can come in. And this test is going to determine your grade. So in one instance, what she can do is she can like set up a bunch of students. All right, we're going to do this task. And at the end of the task, I'm going to test you on that task, see how you do, right? So we're going to learn how to do this, and then I'm going to test you on that. And then the other thing that she does is she'll have the exact same task set up, and then she'll tell like the group, all right, we're just going to play around with learning how to do this one thing, right? And so I'll have you guys try it out, and we'll like look at your work at the end. And so one of the things that she found was that if you put a lot of pressure on people while they are learning something new, their creativity and their ability to learn drops. Like they aren't good at doing that. But the opposite happens if the student is an expert at that task, right? So if they are really, really good at a certain task and you apply pressure, their performance goes up, right? So if you think about it, that's like analogy would be like, all right, let's say I just show you the rules of basketball, and then I say like, all right, you get it? All right, now what we're going to do is we're going to have a one-on-one game, right? You're going to suck at it. Like if you've never played it before and I just told you what the rules were, right? And it's not going to be fun. You're not going to do well. But if you have been playing basketball for the past 10 years and you play it like every day, then I say like, all right, we're going to do a one-on-one game. Your performance goes up, right? And that's the difference. Is like, are you an expert on this task or are you not an expert on this task? And I guess the conclusion that Dr. Gray comes out of this is like, well, if you're in a playful mood, right? Playful moods are destroyed by this, by any kind of outside intervention, right? So, like, what is play? Is kind of like one of the big questions in this. But anything that takes you outside of the spirit of play. So if you apply a like outside pressure, then you're no longer playing. And incentives kind of do this as well. So there's like a different study that they take a look at incentives and to like affect like moods, I guess. And so if you give somebody a prize for doing something, like if that's the goal, right? So if you accomplish this task and we give you a prize, your performance is not actually that great. Your ability to be creative is not that great. But if the goal is just doing the task, right? So I think they do this with art projects in one of the studies. So what you do is you look at like playful moods versus non-playful moods. So this is a study by Paul Howard Jones, professor of neuroscience and education at the University of Bristol, and he puts students into what are called like playful moods. So he allows the students to play, and then he gives them a task where they have to like solve like insight problems, and then he'll take a different group of students or kids, and then he'll have them like do rote memorization. So they have to memorize these words. So they're copying down words, writing them, and then he presents the insight questions to them. The kids that were in a creative mood would do better on the insight questions and would do worse on these other questions. On these, or the kids that were doing rote memorization that were not in a playful mood would do worse on insight questions. And so there's also like other work that's been done by MGDS and PL Harris to demonstrate that like playful moods allow children to solve logic problems with greater ease. And this work was kind of like one of the things that I noticed about this is that he says that he uses this research to kind of come up with this statement like, all right, free play is the best learning environment. But in each one of these studies, play is kind of defined differently, right? So like in one instance, it's, like giving time to go into a playful mood by free play. In another, it's like having children like imagine that they're on a different planet to solve logic problems. And another, it's like, so in each, what he uses is this word like play or playful moods to encompass like a wide variety of activities. And so I think that kind of doesn't strengthen his point. So while we're on play, like what is play? I think this is one of the most important things to ask at this point. So it defines, the book doesn't have like a definite definition, but it just gives you a bunch of characteristics for what play is, right? So play is self-chosen and self-directed. Play is an activity in which the means are more valuable than the ends. So the fun of the game is better than who wins, right? Essentially. The play structure has rules that are imaginative, they're non-literal, or removed from literal life, right? So even though there's rules, these rules aren't like necessarily the same rules for which life operates in, right? So like for instance, if you're playing tag, like being it doesn't really mean anything, right? Like it doesn't translate anything to the real world. It's just like something that we assign to people in our imagination. And play involves an active, alert, non-stressed form of mind. So that's also, other people will call that like being in a flow state. It's kind of like where you lose track of time, but you're highly focused. And anything that takes people, that disrupts any of these characteristics takes people out of play. And that's where I was saying, like, all right, if you give a reward to somebody playing a game, then it's not really play anymore, right? So, uh, so now that we understand, like, all right, hunter gatherers, what kind of information they can learn, how that's different than the way schools are set up, right? So if you know how modern education is set up, it's kind of like, all right, you have classroom, you have a teacher, so all the activities are being led by an adult. So none of this is really going to be considered free play, right? And I guess the conclusion that I've come up with, like from reading the research that was actually in the book, is that I think a stronger, I guess, thesis would be like what you can do is you can leverage aspects of play to increase certain types of learning, right? So, if you can leverage imagination to help kids work out logic problems better, right? And for some reason that works. And I'm not exactly sure why. Like I've read some of the studies that they go like, all right, what you can do is you can teach kids like algebra the traditional way. Like, all right, you have like these are numbers, these are the functions, these are variables, and then you can set them all up into an equation. And what you have to do is you have to obey these rules to solve for the variable, right? That's the traditional way of thinking about algebra. Kids are really bad at learning that way. But what you can do is you can have kids imagine that they are like on a different planet where like a variable is represented by the cost of something that an alien is trying to buy at their alien store, right? And then you can give them like prices of certain things, and you can ask them to kind of figure out what the ultimate price is going to be. That's like the same thing as solving for X, and that's an algebra question. And for some reason, using that imaginative type of thinking helps kids do the logic better, because it almost like shifts their brain into like a different mode of thinking. And that is what I mean by you can use aspects of play to enhance learning. And I don't think that necessarily that if you gave kids nothing but free play, that they would learn in the best way, but they could get pretty far. One of the things that I learned about in the book was they looked at this special school called Sudbury Valley School, which is in Framingham, Massachusetts, I think, is how you say it, Framingham. But this school is really interesting because it has no curriculum, like none. It's for ages 4 through 18, so you can graduate from there. It's there's no curriculum, and it's completely democratically run, meaning that every week they have a meeting where they just vote on policies, and everyone gets an equal vote. So a teacher's vote is the same as a student's vote. Like there's no difference there. And so once a year, everyone gets together, and they even vote on which teachers to keep and which teachers to get rid of. Like that's how democratic it is, right? And because the teachers only make up like 15% of the total people, then they actually have very little say into as far as like whether or not they're going to keep their job from year to year, right? Which I thought was really interesting. So it means that teachers are kind of forced to, like to be liked by the students, which is important. I think students do learn better if they like you versus if they don't like you. So that's a fact right there. I've seen for myself for sure. But this school, what they did is they started to look at like, all right, can these kids learn to an equivalent level that other kids do in traditional schools? And there's been a bunch of studies, not only done by the school, but done by other parties that like third party studies that looked at the graduates of school. And as far as like their math and reading and writing skills are concerned, they are kind of on par with other students. And it's really interesting to see how they learn math. As it turns out, when you let kids play like games, especially board games, they learn math very quickly because it's in the spirit of play. And because they want to play and they want to play with older kids, and the older kids want to play with the younger kids, the older kids teach the younger kids these math skills necessary in order to play these board games. Some of these board games are pretty advanced. And the young kids start off by just looking at the play, and then by trying to play, and then by being mentored by older kids. And then so they can learn like to a pretty high degree algebra, just by playing these games, which I thought was really interesting. And then as far as reading and writing skills, because the kids can choose what they want to learn about, kids are naturally very curious. So if they want to explore a certain topic, like I want to learn about flowers because I'm really interested in flowers and like the colors and all that. Well, the kids have to be able to read in order to learn about flowers, and then they have to be able to take what they learn about flowers and communicate that to somebody else. So they learn reading and writing skills through their own research of learning about like their own particular topic that they want to learn about. And the older kids teach the younger kids, and if there's anything that older kids don't know, then they go to an adult, the teachers on staff, and then the teachers can show them like how to do like high level things. And we'll get set up like little challenges to them. Like, all right, like if you really want to know about like flowers, then I don't know anything about flowers, so I'll show you how to read. And then, can you like through your writing teach me about flowers? And then they keep that spirit of play going so that the kids can learn. And I thought that was really interesting. There are some problems with this kind of way of learning. So I found this study that was done by these Russian scientists that were Russian researchers that were looking to remediate like the schools in Russia, and they looked at the Sudbury Valley School to kind of figure out like, all right, could this be a possible way of reforming schools in Russia? And from their conclusions, I want to see if I can get this right. Like one of their conclusions was really interesting. Let me see. They basically noted school graduates find themselves in various fields of life and build successful careers at the expense of the ability to adapt effectively to different situations, to solve independently any problems, and work creatively. The last part was really interesting because that seemed to be the thesis of the whole book, was that play enables students to be creative. But that's a really interesting statement because on the one hand, the graduates are successful in their own chosen fields, but they aren't able to adapt to new situations. Now that is pretty clear. It's pretty clear why that's the case, right? The way the kids are learning is self-directed, meaning that they're only going to study and they're only going to move in the direction that they want to do or they want to learn. So that means that if they are told to do a different task that maybe they're not interested in, they have no reason to pursue this other task whatsoever, right? Which winds up closing a bunch of doors. Most people that graduate in the United States from a university aren't in a field that is related to their major. But yet at the same time, most people in the United States are satisfied with their jobs, which is, another piece of interesting research that I looked up, and you can find it on Gallup. Gallup keeps track of like job satisfaction, um, and yeah. So I think most people are satisfied or mostly satisfied. I think if you add those two together, it winds up being in the 80 something percentage. And there's been other studies that kind of show the same thing. And we know whether or not, you can also track whether or not people are in the fields that they majored in. So I think it's only like a third of people, it's probably less than a third of people that are in a field that their major is that they majored in, which is kind of astounding, right? All right, most people that go to college aren't even gonna go off and work in the field of that they studied for 4 years. I mean, that to me tells me that there's like a huge inefficiency going on. But yeah, it only studying what you're passionate about is going to make you very rigid. You're not going to find any reasons to adapt to new situations or to change careers or to even you're closing the door to maybe even finding some alternative that might have been satisfying. The second claim there is to solve independently any problems. Well, that also makes sense with the structure of the school. Everything is cooperative, right? If you want to play a game, you got to cooperate with somebody else. And you're constantly asking other people to help you solve problems. And you, as you get older, are helping other people solve problems, which is really interesting. Yeah, so that nobody's independently able to solve any kind of problems after this, right? Because you're always going to be relying on somebody else to kind of help you do the work. Now, in certain fields of life that's very useful. In other fields, it's not really, right? Like nobody wants if I'm if I'm hiring people, if I'm a manager, I don't want to hire somebody that is constantly asking me or other people for help, because then that drops their productivity. And that's with the way things are set up now in the current job market, right? Like, if we had started in this like cooperative fashion, I think we could have had a different economic state, right? Where if collaboration was the norm, that like this free learning type of thing might be more useful. And the last one was to work creatively. That is, yeah, I found that really interesting because I'm like, why aren't they able to work creatively, right? The whole idea of being in a playful mood is to help your creativity. And it might be that, if you look at all of human history, all the development that we've done was once we got out of the hunter-gatherer mindset. I think there's something about being in that free play, like that kind of stifles creativity, and that might be why we for most of human history we didn't have any huge advancements in technology, and that all of our technology just literally popped up in the past, like even like 100 years, 200 years. That's where like most of our technological development happened. So, I understand this idea of trying to leverage our biology in order to increase our ability to learn. And there's certain things that we can take from play. Like I really like this idea of put kids in a playful mood. Like learning should be playful. Teachers should be taught to be playful, right? And we should select teachers on their personality for playfulness. Like that should be a thing. Like school should be fun. And I do truly believe that would help a lot of students. So let's take a look at like what are some implications? What can we take out of this? Most of their successful education systems select their teachers select getting into a teaching program in other countries would be like getting into like a medical school here, right? There's a lot of people applying. A lot of people want this job because if you look at places like Singapore, like Canada, like Finland, like Australia, if you become a teacher, it's very respectable, right? Because it's hard to get into school to become a teacher. The pay is really competitive to other people that go to a 4-year university and graduate with like another certificate or degree. They and those two aspects like make the job be seen as a profession, right? It's hard to do. You get paid a lot, right? That's what we consider professionals. Professionals are people that do difficult things and get compensated really well for. We do not do that here in the United States. We do not do that in California. And California does it the best, right? Like people in California, the teachers in California get paid about 85% of what other graduates with similar degrees get, right? And we're like the best of like all the other, I think only New York probably pays their teachers a little bit more, but that's it, right? So we're on that extreme. But we still like teachers are not really seen as respectable because we don't get paid enough, right? We just don't. But at the same time, we as teachers should own up to the fact that, our credentialing programs aren't like really all that prestigious. Like anyone can just go in and complete a credentialing program. I've talked to various teachers where I was like, how's your experience, your credentialing program? Hey, it was all right. It didn't prepare me for anything, but here I am, right? like that's shocking, right? It should be exclusive. Yeah, it should. And in other countries, what they do is they select candidates for teachers on aspects of their own personality. Some people have personality characteristics that are not conducive to being teachers. And in the United States right now, those people have to go through the whole credentialing process, go teach for a little bit, and then find out that they aren't equipped for that, right? So that's like that seems like a huge waste of time. Not only is it a waste of time, but who's suffering out at the end of that? It's the students that are suffering out at the end of that. So that doesn't make sense. I don't understand why we're doing that. It just doesn't make sense. So one of the things that we can do, or we can take this book and apply it, is we should be able to select teachers on personality characteristics. We should also teach teachers how to be playful. And we should teach teachers the research on how to leverage playfulness and playful moods so that they can enhance their teaching, right? So that's what I got out of this book. So it was very useful and very informative. And if you want to know like the history of teaching, if you want to know like how hunter-gatherers learn, and if you want to know what are the types of things that the research shows can help in educating our students, this is a great book, right? And I highly recommend it to any educators. All right. And with that, we're going to call it a day. So this has been my review of Free to Learn by Peter Gray. I highly recommend the book to all educators. There's definitely something that you can get out at the end of that. If you found this podcast, if you want to help me out on my journey, the best thing you can do is recommend the podcast to friends and family. And this way, together, we can hopefully improve the state of education, right? And I'm also looking for stories from you guys. If you have any interesting teaching stories that you wanted me to like share out, or if you just want a shout out, you can always email me at lessismore.education@skiff.com. That's skiff.com. You can find me on Instagram at lessismore.education, on Twitter at lessismoreeduc1. The website is lessismore.education. The YouTube link is going to be linked below in the description, and the Patreon is patreon.com/lessismoreeducation. and I'll see you guys next week.